Why have the Jewish people suffered so much throughout their history? Why is their very existence being threatened today? And why must they always fight just to survive? The answers to these questions next in this episode of The Prophetic Connection. Behind me, you can see what remains of an Israeli tank facing the kingdom of Jordan, a casualty in one of the many wars Israel has had to fight with the kingdom of Jordan. And the tank sits where it was hit by a shell here in the Jordan Valley. Why has Israel suffered so much? And why is our history one long series of wars, of fights for survival? Well, Moses gives us the answer in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. And among the curses, a constant fight for survival. War after war, and even today in the opening decades of the 21st centuries, threats against the very survival of Israel, with her neighbors threatening to wipe this tiny Jewish nation off the map.
Who can adequately explain the modern miracle that is Israel? Reborn in 1948 as a Jewish homeland on a narrow slice of land at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, Israel today can claim her rightful place among the most progressive and developed nations on earth. Israeli scientific research continues to lead the way in virtually every field of human endeavor, including high-tech innovations such as the cell phone. Scientific advancements in the field of medicine owe much to Israeli researchers. Until Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza in August 2005, Israeli farmers were demonstrating again and again that they were agricultural masters who could make even the sterile sands of Gaza fruitful. So much accomplished by so few in such a short time. This is the mystery and miracle that is Israel in the 21st century. While the nation's world should be thankful for all that Israel has and is contributing for the benefit of humankind, there are still those who do not rejoice in Israel's success. The Jewish people have survived centuries of anti-Semitism, brutal persecution, and at times, periods of mass murder, such as the European Holocaust. Yet today, Israel survives and thrives. But how can this wave of prosperity be explained against a backdrop of such horrendous suffering?
Israel has survived as a nation against all odds over the centuries because of God's sovereign plan. God has made commitments to Israel in the form of covenants, and Israel is working out God's end-time plan, and God is committed to see that that plan is accomplished. Another reason for Israel's endurance as a nation is the intercession of Christians over the generations. In Isaiah chapter 62, God says, "On your walls, O Jerusalem, I have appointed watchmen who will give me no rest. They will cry out night and day." And I believe there have always been Christians over the last 2,000 years in every generation who would stand in the gap and pray for God's blessings on Israel.
Does Israel have a secret means of enduring?
Does Israel have a secret means of enduring? I mean, there's a means of enduring, it's not secret. It's stated over and over again. It's the most oft repeated, probably theme in the entire Hebrew Bible, is our means of enduring is the covenantal agreement we have with the creator of the universe. I mean, we keep our side of the bargain, God keeps his, but what is unique is that God says no matter what, there'll always be a Jewish people. The difference is, to the extent that we keep our side of the bargain, having that relationship with God and with each other, and proactively being that God squad, pushing this message of one God, one absolute values on the world, to the extent that we do that and push the darkness out, is to the extent that we will get through this incredible human history quickly and painlessly. You know, there's a great rule in physics that nature abhors a vacuum. Vacuums don't like to exist. They'll be filled with something. And we understand that if we don't fill the world with the values that come from God, that we're the conduit for, the world's going to be full of the opposite values. The opposite values are evil. When evil comes into the world, that will target us. So yes, there'll always be a Jewish people. But the journey is up to us. How many will be left at the end of the story, how quickly, how slowly, how painfully, how painlessly that will go, that is up to us. But for better or for worse, we're told we'll survive because our great-great-grandfather Abraham signed into a contractual agreement 3,700 years ago that the Jewish people, when we went from a family to a nation, stood at Mount Sinai and said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do it and then we'll listen. We're in, guys. God, just tell us what our mission is, and we agree, no matter what, to stick to that mission throughout history until the goal is finally reached of bringing the whole human race back to that relationship with God.
But what does the near-term future hold for Israel, given that she exists in one of the most unpredictable and volatile regions on earth?
Israel's near-term future looks like what Jesus described in Matthew chapter 24 when he said there will be wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom. But in those same passages, Jesus also said, "See to it that you are not troubled by these things. They must come to pass." And he called them the beginning of birth pangs. We are today in the birth pangs of the end times, and these birth pangs are surrounding Israel. The conflict between Ishmael and Isaac is now in the process of being resolved. And so the near-term future of Israel will be wars and rumors of wars, a lot of challenges, and yet God's purposes will be triumphant.
Don't go away. After this short break, Dr. John Tweedie returns with his teaching. Since the October 7th attacks on Israel, anti-Semitism has increasingly risen around the globe at an alarming rate. Jews and Israelis have faced protests, persecution, and violence on campuses in some of the most modern and civilized countries in the world. And while the Israeli economy suffers during this war, many of their most vulnerable are in desperate need. C4I has been there from the start, supplying food, clothing, and resources to those who need it most. When you give a one-time gift of $25 or more, you are making a real difference in the lives of the people of Israel. And as a special thank you, you will receive the bi-monthly newspaper, Israel the Prophetic Connection. Call the number on your screen now, 1-888-206-1986, or go to c4iamerica.com with your generous gift and show the people of Israel that you care.
As we saw earlier in the introduction, Israel had a choice. The choice was to obey God and be blessed, or to disobey God and suffer the consequences of that disobedience. Moses made this plain in the book of Deuteronomy, which is known as the book of second law. And so he reiterated to Israel what God required. And Deuteronomy chapter 28 opens with a whole list of blessings that would fall upon Israel if she walked in obedience with the Lord her God. But after the blessings are announced, then the consequences of sin and disobedience, and they're the opposite of what the blessings were. But let me just read the curses that would come upon Israel, and that's what they were, should they disobey the covenants and violate the ways of the Lord. And we read in verse 15 of Deuteronomy 28, "But it shall come to pass," and this is God speaking through Moses, "but it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Curse in the sense that they come from God. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the country. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body, and the produce of your land, the increase of your cattle and the offspring of your flocks. Cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will send on you cursing, confusion, and rebuke in all that you set your hand to do, until you are destroyed, and until you perish quickly because of the wickedness of your doings, in which you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the plague cling to you until he has consumed you from the land which you are going to possess. So you'll be displaced out of the land, and this happened. There were two major dispersions, one in 586 BC at the hands of the Babylonian armies, and a second, in fact, an even worse dispersion that would last for nearly 2,000 years at the hands of the Roman armies that came and plundered Israel and destroyed Jerusalem, and with it the great temple. And then, of course, the Latin diaspora, which means dispersion into all nations, and a dispossession of the land for nearly 2,000 years. Then this, in verse 22, the Lord will strike you with consumption, with fever, with inflammation, with severe burning fever, with the sword, with scorching, and with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. I mean, very strong warnings to Israel. And your heavens which are over your head shall be bronze, and the earth which is under you shall be iron. The Lord will change the rain of your land to powder and dust. From the heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies, and you shall go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them. And you shall become troublesome to all the kingdoms of the earth. And we wonder today why Israel is maligned and anti-Semitism is so prevalent in our world today. And God's saying, I'm going to cause trouble between you and the nations where I send you. And then we read on and we go down to verse 45 and to 47. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you. And they shall be upon you for a sign and a wonder, and on your descendants forever. And implicit in that verse, the mockery of the nations, saying of Israel, well, we thought you were the chosen people because you worship what you said was the one true God. And how is it that you have suffered so much? And of course, we know that this slander against Israel, well, God speaks of it in Ezekiel 36 when he talks about the restoration to Israel. And then he says, I haven't done it for your sakes, Israel, because you deserve everything the nations say about you, but I've done it for my name's sake. And then this verse 47, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness of heart for the abundance of everything. In other words, all that I have done for you, everything I have given you, Israel. So quickly you forgot, and so quickly you turned from following me, and you turned to your own selfish and wicked ways. Now, I share those scriptures with you from the lips of Moses, speaking for God, to help us all better understand why Israel seems to have suffered so much. There are reasons for her suffering. The primary reason is disobedience, a violation of the covenants that God made with her and with no other nation on earth. A chosen, privileged people who should always have been thankful, but who so very often violated that covenant relationship and offended God. So this is how we explain in part, sadly, a history steeped in blood. I'm standing on the Golan Heights. Behind me, the Sea of Galilee, so I'm on the east shore of the Golan Heights. And north is in that direction, south the other way. And these Golan Heights were held by Syria from 1948 with the rebirth of Israel, which occurred actually 1878 years after they were dispersed from the land in AD 70 by the Romans. So it was nearly 2,000 years, a very long period of exile, which explains how we have Jews all over the world. And so the Syrians held on to the Golan Heights beyond 1948. In fact, they held them to 1967. In 1967, in 6 days of war, a war that Israel didn't seek but was forced to fight, Israel tripled her territory. Her armies crossed the Suez Canal, took all of the Sinai Peninsula. They captured the Gaza Strip. The last phase of the 6-day war, and we're only speaking of 6 days, the last phase was to capture the Golan Heights. But take a look at the vantage point the Syrians had. Anyone who holds the heights has an immediate advantage because they are more easy to defend and so much harder to attack. And all down the slopes from where I'm standing, and in fact, even today in the 21st century, all around in these hills, there are minefields. Now there are cows grazing and the land has been cleared in many places, and kibbutzim, communal farms, are found on the Golan Heights. So the land has been cleared and you have vineyards and orchards and cows and all manner of things up here. But to capture this and to make this dream a reality was paid for in blood. And as the Israeli soldiers climbed these heights against intense fire, they had to do it by crossing minefields. So it's a vantage point to explain the price in blood that Israel has paid for disobedience. But you can think of the Second World War, which isn't that long ago. And you can think of the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were systematically killed by the Nazis. And what an incredible price that was as well. And all down through history, disobedience led to catastrophe, and the curses of Deuteronomy 28 were realized in bloodshed. A succession of wars since 1948, and I could just list the major wars, but certainly the War of Independence to bring about the establishment of Israel, because when the first Prime Minister of modern Israel, David Ben-Gurion, announced that the new state bearing its old name, Israel, was born, the very next day, 5 Arab armies attacked Israel. And so the price began to be paid with the rebirth. 1956, the Suez Canal crisis, and once again, Israel was at war. 1967, the 6-day war, when Israel captured where I'm standing, the property of Syria, and pushed the Syrians far back and extended their eastern border much farther back than where it was before. Well, the Syrians weren't happy about losing the Golan Heights. And in 1973, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, other than, we might say, the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, which is important as well. But on Yom Kippur, also known as the Day of Atonement, the whole nation was at rest. People were in their synagogues. This was before the era of cell phones and rapid communication. And the Syrians attacked on a 20-mile front with 2,000 tanks, and they overran the Golan Heights, and their tanks were actually overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And again, the price was paid in blood. It took Israel 3 days to get her armies together and have the units mobile. And the story is told, and I can't say if it's true, but I've heard this story more than once, that the commander of the Syrian forces felt that our attack was too successful, too quick, and too easy. There should have been greater resistance than we encountered. And he was old enough to remember that 6 years earlier in the Sinai, Israel surrounded the Egyptian Third Army with a pincer movement. They let them advance, and then they went round them on two sides and came in behind them and cut off their supply line from Egypt. And he remembered that. He perhaps even fought in those battles. So for whatever reason, the Syrian commander halted his attack. This gave the Israeli forces time to mobilize, counterattack, and then push the Syrians back off the Golan. Now, I used to have an Israeli guide. When he would explain these things to me, he would simply say, the finger of God. The unexplained things that make no sense in the natural realm, but for us as Christians, tell us that for all our failings, God shows up and is with us in times of strife and when we're at risk of losing everything. And then, of course, today, in the opening decades of the 21st century, the ongoing terrorist wars of attrition. And even as I stand here this morning, Iran is agitating in Syria, not very far from here. And you will hear here and there the sonic booms of Israeli jets going overhead, or the blast of artillery shells. We're close enough to Syria to hear these things when they occur. So let me put it this way, as we think of the suffering of Israel and her survival against all odds, a few points. First of all, it can be said that Israel's suffering is due in part to the fact that there are self-inflicted wounds because of disobedience or even wrong choices down through history. Secondly, they are and remain a chosen nation under God to reflect heaven's light, God's standards in the world in which we live. And here today they observe the weekly Sabbath and the other feasts of Israel. In fact, the Feast of Tabernacles, the last feast of the year, ended just the other day. And so they still honor God in that way. And because they are a chosen nation, Satan hates them. And that helps to explain anti-Semitism as well. They are hated because of their special relationship with God. And the nations who hate them probably don't even understand why they hate them. And I would say simply it is a spirit, a satanic spirit, that is bred in the nations in every generation. But it all leads to a very happy place. After all the suffering and why they will survive, and that is one day their Messiah, their promised Messiah, will come. And he will right what is wrong, and righteousness will reign in Israel. And Israel has God's guarantee of that very survival. But I'll explain more about that after this very short break.
Recent global events reported on the news appear to make it clear that we have entered the final phase of human history. Just as the Bible describes, wars and rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, pestilences, and other disasters are occurring more frequently than ever before. Are we witnessing the countdown to Armageddon? This new DVD series of Reverend Dr. John Tweedie's 20th season of The Prophetic Connection explores the scriptures to uncover the truth of the coming final battle, Armageddon. Call the number on your screen now, 1-888-206-1986, or visit C4IAmerica.com to become a new monthly partner with your gift of $25 a month or more. And you will receive this DVD set ideal for individual or small group study, along with the bi-monthly newspaper Israel: A Prophetic Connection. We're waiting to hear from you.
As we've already seen in this episode, Israel has paid a very heavy price for disobedience. But not only for that, for also being truly a chosen people, a nation chosen by God to reflect His standards in the world, to reflect heaven's light in the world. Well, Israel is back in the land once again. And once again, she's having to fight to survive against all odds, and almost daily threats against her existence. We were on the border with Syria yesterday, very close to the fence, and a young Israeli officer explained to us that the defenses are always being tested. There are people who are coming close to the fence dressed as shepherds with flocks, but they're really being paid for their services to see if Israel has any blind spots or places of weakness where she could be attacked. And so these are people posing as shepherds, as it were, but on behalf of Iran and the other enemies that are also in Syria, building bases, drone bases and other bases with infantry and armor and so forth, just waiting for the opportunity to attack Israel once again. So while she's back in the land and rejoicing in the promises that have been fulfilled through the prophets, she can never let her guard down, because in that moment of weakness, she will be attacked once again. This is the story of Israel down through the centuries. And Satan always trying to take advantage, because he knows this is the nation that gave the world a savior, a Messiah figure who, for Christians, is Jesus of Nazareth, and who promised to be coming again. And Satan will do everything he can to prevent Christ returning to Israel, specifically to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. But Israel has a guarantee that for all her enemies may plot and plan, this is found in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 35. Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for a light by day, the ordinances of the moon and the stars for a light by night, who disturbs the sea and its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, says the Lord, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me forever. So this morning, the sun is shining just through the trees and casting her rays of sunshine over the Golan Heights and down the slopes onto the Sea of Galilee and onto the western shore. And the city of Tiberias, it's on the other side, a large, thriving city today. Simply put, God has guaranteed Israel's survival against all odds. He has a glorious future in store for her. And as long as that sun shines and the moon and the stars by night, God's guarantee stands, and Israel shall survive.
Thanks for joining us today on the Prophetic Connection. Since the October 7th attacks on Israel, anti-Semitism has increasingly risen around the globe at an alarming rate. Jews and Israelis have faced protests, persecution, and violence on campuses in some of the most modern and civilized countries in the world. And while the Israeli economy suffers during this war, many of their most vulnerable are in desperate need. C4I has been there from the start, supplying food, clothing, and resources to those who need it most. When you give a one-time gift of $25 or more, you are making a real difference in the lives of the people of Israel. And as a special thank you, you will receive the bi-monthly newspaper, Israel the Prophetic Connection. Call the number on your screen now, 1-888-206-1986, or go to c4iamerica.com with your generous gift and show the people of Israel that you care.